No enemy in Fallout New Vegas, not the ghouls, not the centaurs, not even the ghost people, can truly be described as undead, except the Y-17 trauma override harnesses. An enemy introduced to us in Big MT during the Old World Blues add-on. At first glance, they looked like astronauts. Then you most likely noticed the skull and made your immediate mission in life to kill them, and as quickly as possible, possibly with fire. But what are these people? I mean things... spooky skeletons? Why are they inside Big MT? Where did they come from, and if they were created, for what purpose? I will try and answer this, and more. So let's find out. So what are they? Well, the key is in the word, trauma. The idea behind the suits was that they would provide the user with a certain measure of protection. Then, if the user was injured or even killed, the suits would take control. Inside the Y-17 facility, we can find a terminal entry stating that the suit was able to take over the injured wearer's motor functions and walk them back to a designated area called a home base. This would allow them to be operated on and taken care of, meaning that soldiers who were injured could be taken back to receive the care they need to get back out there and murder more people. It then goes on to say what they could achieve if the suit learned to replicate how a soldier fights. Unfortunately, that is exactly what happened. The second terminal entry states that the harnesses had three primary problems. The amount of injury that the user has to sustain before the suit takes over. Obviously, if the damage threshold is too high, it would defeat the purpose of bringing soldiers back to get treatment. And if it was too low, then a stubbed toe or a skinned knee would also trigger the harness. The second issue is that a home base needs to be specified. All the harnesses we encounter simply wander around with what appears to be no purpose at all, and this seems to be a problem that they were all too aware of. The last issue is that the suit doesn't seem to be able to tell whether the wearer is dead or not. Now they do comment that retrieving corpses is also quite useful, but obviously in the situation we find ourselves in, when all three problems are present, it's a load of fucking shit. All of these issues seem to have manifested themselves, all at once inside X-12. We can find a trauma harness called the Master Trauma Harness inside the facility, sealed underneath a force field. This trauma harness was once Harris, an employee of X-12 and supposed tester of the harnesses. While wearing one of them, he choked on a mighty buffalo gourd seed and died. The researchers then discovered that his suit would not shut down and requested a weapon that would help them kill it. They got the K-9000 Cyberdog gun sent over, but the cunt that was carrying it slipped and fell, dropping the gun. Then one of the phenomena that was described in the Y-17 terminal occurred. The harness learned how to use a fucking gun. The rest of the staff then evacuated and sealed the harness inside for over 200 years, before we show up to kill it and take its weapon. So first, their appearance. The suits are primarily red in colour, with stripes of yellow covering it. A sort of chest plate can be found worn on the top of the suit, with a seal of some sort found on the chest plate. The purpose of it is unknown. It was possibly a way to charge the suit up, or as a locking mechanism to make sure it couldn't be opened by just anyone. The latter is more likely, as many of the suits are still functioning over 2 centuries later. 2 oxygen tanks can be found on the back. The need for these is only apparent when you encounter the harnesses with helmets on. The suits were most likely sealed up and then these tanks would provide oxygen to the user. 2 centuries later, all the users are long dead, and now only skeletons remain. Somehow, even though the suits do not cover the hands of the corpses, they still manage to manipulate them to use weapons. This is most likely just an oversight on Obsidian's part. Or, you know, magic. So far, we have a walking skeleton inside a rubber harness that can shoot you. However, that isn't even the most gruesome thing about these harnesses. Consider this. Given the amount of trauma harnesses we see inside Big MT, a lot of people must have been wearing them. Harris was working late, and was still wearing one. So here's what I think happened. Many people were wearing the suits. They were no doubt doing so to help the suits learn certain movements and reflexes, as we are told in the Y-17 terminal entries, that reproducing the actions of a soldier was one of the plans for the harness. Eventually, all the shit in Big MT kicked off. We will most likely look at that during another video, but for now, think back to what I mentioned during my videos on the Cazadors and the Night Stalkers. Now we know 3 things. The harnesses didn't have a threshold for what kind of injury would warrant them taking control, which meant even a minor injury could cause them to assume control of the wearer. It couldn't tell if they were dead, and it would wander aimlessly if no home base was set. After all the mayhem, people wearing the suits were injured, and the suits assumed control. Now we can assume that this only happened shortly after or when Harris's suit took over, or else they would not have let so many people wear the suits, or they were not aware of the effect all the faults happening at once would produce. So the suits took over and had learned how to operate weapons, and defended their wearers as a result. They had no home base set, so the spooky shits wandered Big MT, and did so indefinitely. Now here's the gruesome part. The researchers had no way to actually take the suits off, or turn them off, so they remained in control for all 2 centuries. This means the people inside the suits were still alive up to a point. Now some may have actually had bad injuries, and may have died as a result of them. Others, however, may not have been so lucky. No mention is made of the suits having a way to sustain the user in the way of nutrients or food and water, so it's assumed that the idea was that the suits would never be far enough away that this would be an issue. This means that many of the researchers in the suits died from lack of food. They would have slowly starved to death inside the suits, wasting away while their bodies were controlled by another. But there was one more way to die as well: lack of oxygen. I mentioned earlier that some of them had helmets, and that the suits were sealed and provided oxygen via the tanks on their backs. Well, at some point those tanks had to have run out, meaning that the wearer would eventually asphyxiate and die. So yeah, not too great crack there. The last point that I want to bring up is possible speech. If you have the Wild Wasteland perk, then the harnesses will sometimes say, "Hey, who turned out the lights?" This is a reference to the Doctor Who episode Silence in the Library. The library is full of microscopic creatures called Vashta Narada. It means the shadows that melt the flesh. It took over the spacesuits of the people present and used them to get away from the light and to move around. They ate all the flesh, leaving only the bones and a suit they can control and move around to attack with. This mirrors what happens with the trauma harnesses, where the suits have taken on almost a mind of their own, and the original inhabitants have no choice but to sit inside the suits, slowly dying inside a rubber coffin, which is probably filled with piss and shit given that no disposal system seems to be present and the suits were meant to be airtight. Now even though it is through a perk, they can speak, so I think there is a possibility that they may have some pre-recorded messages, perhaps to identify the types of wounds the wearer has to doctors and medics. But due to all these faults, these suits became no more than murderous coffins on legs. One of the creepier and more mysterious enemies that any of the New Vegas DLCs have produced. If you like this look at them, I would appreciate a like and a share. If you want to see more of my content, check out my playlist to see if there are any more questions on Fallout that you have and I may have answered. Any support in spreading the word of this channel is greatly appreciated, as Fallout 4 is just around the corner. If you want to support me and get regular updates, subscribe. Any questions or feedback for the episode should be left either in the comments below or on my subreddit, which is linked in the description. Follow me on Twitter or Facebook to get regular channel updates and to talk to me or have a wee chat. I hope you did enjoy this episode, and I hope to see you in the next one. Until then, goodbye.